Ever wonder why the second you stop chasing someone, they suddenly start running after you? It's wild, right? One day, you're bending over backwards to prove your worth, to show them you care, to keep the connection alive. You're sending the good morning texts, you're checking in, you're lighting up when they walk into the room. And then, nothing. You pull back. You go silent. And all of a sudden, they panic. Why is that? Why do people seem to lose their minds the moment you act like they don't matter? Here's the thing nobody talks about. Most people aren't in love with you. They're in love with what you do for them. That validation, that emotional support, that consistent presence, it's like a drug. And when you take it away, withdrawal hits hard. This isn't some manipulative tactic. This is self-preservation. And it's more powerful than you've ever been taught. Let me ask you this. How often have you overextended just to be understood? How many times have you been the bigger person, the one who reached out, the one who tried again and again, just to end up feeling ignored, devalued, or disposable? You were told silence is petty. That walking away means you gave up. That love is proven by how long you stay. But what if that's all wrong? What if the real power comes when you stop reacting? What if letting go isn't weakness, but wisdom? This is where stoicism becomes your secret weapon. Not cold detachment, but grounded, calm self-respect. A mindset that doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't explain. It simply observes, accepts, and rises. That's the shift we're diving into today. In this video, we're not just talking about emotional distance. We're talking about psychological power, energetic transformation, personal rebirth. We're going to uncover 6 brutal truths that will not only flip the way you look at relationships, but also light a fire under your soul. Because when you stop proving your worth to people who only valued the way you made them feel, everything changes. You stop being a source of comfort, and you become a source of confusion. You stop being predictable, and you become unforgettable. So buckle up. What we're about to explore isn't just insight. It's a roadmap to reclaiming your peace, your dignity, and your emotional sovereignty. These aren't just ideas. They're transformative truths rooted in Stoic relationships and the philosophy of Stoicism that's been tested through centuries. So don't go anywhere. What comes next might just change everything you thought you knew about love, silence, and your own damn power. 1. The illusion of importance. Have you ever stopped to wonder why people only seem to realize your value once you've withdrawn it? It's not an accident. It's a mirror reflecting the illusion they bought into. The illusion that your presence was permanent, your warmth automatic, your affection guaranteed. For a long time, you were playing a role, the consistent one, the available one, the one who always cared, always replied, always made room. You became the one who poured light into their world even when yours was dim. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Many people didn't love you. They loved the role you played, the benefit they received, the version of themselves they got to experience in your presence. When you gave, they took. When you listened, they vented. When you showed up, they leaned in. And they mistook that rhythm for permanence, for entitlement, for security. The illusion was built on one-sided benefit. They believed, consciously or not, that you existed to orbit their needs. And when you pulled back, when your emotional light stopped shining in their direction, they didn't miss you. They missed what they lost access to. They missed the ego boost, the convenience, the power. That's when the panic sets in. But let's be honest, how did you get there? How did someone else's sense of importance become your responsibility to maintain? Because you were conditioned to believe that love means presence. That care means constant proof. That the more you give, the more secure the bond becomes. You were sold the lie that consistency guarantees reciprocity. But Stoicism teaches a different truth. Your energy is sacred, not infinite. You owe no one constant access to your emotional reservoir, especially not those who've taken it for granted. So when you finally detach, not with malice, not with rage, but with calm clarity, it's like pulling a plug from a socket. Everything they powered their ego with suddenly shuts down. And in that silence, in that sudden power outage, their illusion collapses. They begin to realize they weren't standing on solid ground. They were standing on the scaffolding of your effort, your emotional availability, your willingness to remain even when it hurt. But here's the beauty: illusions are meant to be broken. Because the longer you feed the myth of their importance, the more you shrink your own. So the moment you step back, not to manipulate but to recalibrate, you begin to reclaim your truth. You see, they were the performer, but you were the stage. They were the face, but you were the light. And they never imagined that light could dim. That's what shakes them, not your absence, but their loss of control. And it goes deeper. When someone's self-worth is tethered to how much you validate them, your silence becomes a threat. Not because they suddenly love you more, but because they love how they felt when you paid attention. There's a big difference. Your presence became a drug, an emotional high they didn't have to earn. They assumed your care was unconditional, and so they treated it as optional. They didn't need to show up fully, because you'd always be there. That's the illusion. That's what breaks when you walk away without announcement. Suddenly, they're freezing, standing in the cold, shocked that the fire they never fueled has gone out. And yet, here's the paradox: they didn't notice the warmth while it was burning. They only noticed the chill after it's gone. And that's on them, not you. Because you can't keep being the sun for someone who only shows up for the light, never the storm. So you pull back. And in doing so, you force them to confront a reality they never considered, that they weren't as important as they believed, not because you never valued them, but because they mistook your giving for weakness. That's what Stoic relationships remind us. Value isn't proven by how much you endure, but by how clearly you define your boundaries. The illusion of importance was never about you. It was about the image they had of themselves while standing next to your devotion. You made them feel more than they were. And when you stopped, they fell back into their own emptiness. That's the pain. That's the loss. Not you, but the version of themselves they accessed through you. So don't confuse their panic for love. Don't mistake their confusion for regret. What they miss isn't your heart, it's your energy, your presence, your effort. And when you reclaim those things, you don't just dismantle the illusion. You reveal the truth, that you were the valuable one all along. You were the foundation, not the filler. You were the source, not the shadow. And the moment you act like they don't matter, not with ego, but with stoic calm, they lose their mind. Because you shattered the illusion. And now, they're left with the reality. The performance is over, the spotlight's off, and the stage is empty. That's the cost of their entitlement. That's the price of taking you for granted. And you? You're free. Free to no longer perform. Free to no longer feed illusions. Free to walk forward, not in rage, but in reverence. Reverence for the version of you that's no longer available to those who couldn't see your worth until your silence made it undeniable. 2. Your energy was the currency. Let's call it what it really was. Your energy wasn't just appreciated, it was consumed. Like a resource, like fuel, like oxygen. And for a long time, you were giving it freely. You showed up, not just physically but emotionally. You answered calls, sent messages, forgave easily, checked in, reassured again, and then once more for good measure. And they received all of it like it was owed, like your effort came from a bottomless well. But here's the raw truth most people refuse to admit: attention is currency. Emotional labor is a transaction. And what happens when you keep paying into something that never gives returns? You go bankrupt. Not just emotionally, but spiritually. You begin to doubt your worth because they never acknowledged the cost. But they felt it when it stopped, didn't they? The moment you went quiet, the moment you didn't respond within minutes, the moment your digital presence faded from their feed, they noticed. Not because they love you deeply, but because they lost the consistent dose of validation your attention provided. You weren't just a person in their life. You were an emotional stimulus. They used your availability like a mirror to admire themselves, not for who they truly are, but for how important they felt when you paid attention. That's what they miss now. Not your heart, not your soul, not your truth, but the power they felt when they could count on your light. And now that the light is gone, The room feels darker than they ever expected. Here's the harsh but liberating realization: people will take as much as you give. And the more you give without boundaries, the more you teach them that your presence costs nothing. That's the danger. When someone believes your energy is cheap, they treat it like loose change. But your energy is sacred. It's the source of your power, your peace, your presence. And Stoicism reminds us, protect your energy like your life depends on it. Because it does. Think about it. Every time you replied to a lazy message, every time you forgave without change, every time you stayed quiet to avoid conflict, you were spending energy. And they were cashing in. Not reciprocating. Not building. Just collecting. And the moment you stopped, they felt it in their chest like a withdrawal symptom. They checked their phone more. They refreshed old messages. They replayed old interactions trying to find proof that they still mattered. But all they found was silence. And that silence, for someone who's addicted to external validation, is unbearable. Let's go deeper. Why did you keep giving when it was clear they weren't matching your effort? Why did you keep paying into that connection even when it made you feel empty? Because you thought love meant giving more. You thought your loyalty would be the glue. You believed that if you just kept loving harder, they would eventually see. But love without reciprocity isn't love, it's self-neglect. And here's where your power returns. When you stop giving, you stop bleeding. When you stop over-explaining, over-caring, overextending, you create space for yourself. Space to breathe, to recover, to remember that your attention was never the problem. It was your boundaries. And now that you've built them, they're exposed. Not you. Because now they're standing outside the gate that used to be wide open. They're wondering why the texts aren't being answered, why the Instagram story didn't get viewed, why your name no longer lights up their notifications. That's the cost of taking energy for granted. And here's where it gets even more real. If they truly valued you, they would have invested in you. Not just reacted to your presence, but built something mutual, something reciprocal, something strong. But they didn't. They consumed. And you allowed it, until now. Until you realize that you're not a faucet they can turn on whenever they're thirsty. You're a well. And that well has limits. You're not cutting off energy to punish. You're doing it to protect. You're not disappearing to play games. You're stepping back to save your soul. Because when your energy is drained, your peace evaporates. And no one is worth losing your peace over. This is the part where most people get it twisted. They think going quiet means you're being passive-aggressive. That not responding is a tactic. But in Stoic relationships, it's a boundary. It's a declaration of self-worth. A quiet revolution. You are not a product. You are not a vending machine for validation. You're a living, breathing human being with finite emotional resources. And now you're choosing where and how to spend them. That's not petty. That's powerful. So what do they do now that the flow is cut? They perform. They pretend. They post pictures, stories, quotes, anything to get a reaction. But you're not reacting anymore. You're not watching the stories. You're not liking the selfies. You're not decoding the captions. Because that's not your job anymore. Your job is to reclaim your energy and invest it in yourself. In your growth. In your clarity. In the peace that Stoicism teaches us to cherish more than any fleeting high of attention. And you'll notice something strange. When you stop pouring into others, your own cup starts to fill. You sleep better. You breathe deeper. You feel lighter. And that's not loneliness. That's liberation. The quiet you're experiencing? That's your soul healing from the noise of one-sided connection. That's your emotional ecosystem restoring itself. And in that space, you remember who you are, not just someone who gives, but someone who deserves. Deserves presence. Deserves effort. Deserves love that doesn't have to be earned through exhaustion. So let the silence stretch. Let them feel the gap. Let them wonder what happened to the person who used to be so available. Because what happened wasn't drama. It was alignment. It was awakening. It was choosing peace over performance. And if they ever return, it won't be because you begged. It will be because they realized your presence was never guaranteed. It was earned. So if you've ever felt like your energy was being wasted, if you've ever stayed too long in a space that drained you, let this be your wake-up call. You're not just someone who loves, you're someone whose love has weight, has value, has boundaries. And when you finally stop giving it away like it's free, they don't just notice. They unravel. So if you've made it this far and this message is speaking to your soul, do something bold, hit that like button, and drop a comment that says, Number 1, if you know what it's like to feel your energy being drained. And if you're serious about rising higher and building stoic relationships that are rooted in mutual respect, not emotional dependency, go ahead and subscribe right now. This isn't just content. This is your blueprint to peace. 3. Detachment isn't cold, it's clarity. There's a lie that gets repeated in almost every corner of culture, whispered through love songs, reinforced by films, echoed by well-meaning friends, that detachment is cruel, that silence is petty, that if you truly care, you must constantly prove it with presence, response, and sacrifice. But let's interrogate that belief. Who benefits from it? The ones who receive the effort, not the ones who constantly give it. We live in a world that glamorizes emotional availability, but punishes those who step back. You're called cold if you stop replying. You're told you're selfish if you withdraw. But Stoicism flips that script. Because detachment, true, calm, grounded detachment, isn't cold. It's clarity. It's the realization that connection is not supposed to cost you your peace. And when it does, you don't rage. You don't explain. You don't plead for them to understand. You step back. Not to hurt them, but to save yourself. Because self-respect doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just walks away. Let me ask you, how many times have you stayed in conversations just to avoid being misunderstood? How many times have you explained your side, defended your silence, softened your tone, just to keep things from falling apart? You were told it was noble. But what it really did was drain you. And the ones who drained you? They were never confused. They knew what they were doing. They knew you cared. That's why they didn't. That's why they stopped showing up fully. Because they assumed you'd always be the one to bridge the gap. But clarity is knowing when to stop building bridges to people who burn them every time they cross. When you become detached, something sacred happens. You no longer respond to every emotion. You no longer justify your existence. You become still, like deep water. And that stillness isn't silence, it's strategy. You see clearer. You hear things for what they are. You feel your own heartbeat again. And in that clarity, you realize something liberating. You don't need to be understood by them. You need to be respected by yourself. The problem is, many people confuse your detachment with punishment. They think you're ignoring them to gain power. But what they don't realize is that power was never the goal. Peace was. Because when you detach, you're not trying to teach them a lesson. You're trying to unlearn your own. The lesson that said love means staying no matter how you feel. That care means overextending. That loyalty means suffering. That's the lesson you're finally letting go of. And as you do, everything starts to change. Their confusion? It's not your responsibility. Their frustration? It's not your burden. Because when you're no longer emotionally entangled in someone else's inconsistency, you become sovereign. And in Stoic relationships, sovereignty is the foundation. It's not about pretending you don't care. It's about refusing to collapse just to prove you do. Let me be clear, detachment isn't distance. It's depth. It's choosing your inner stillness over outer chaos. It's choosing truth over performance. It's choosing not to react when someone tests your boundaries, and instead watching calmly as they reveal their own patterns. And the more you do that, the more powerful you become. Not because you're dominant, but because you're unmoved. Emotional detachment is not numbness. It's maturity. It's knowing that your value isn't up for negotiation. It's remembering that peace is not something you earn through others, it's something you guard within yourself. Think about the people who get shaken when you go silent. Not because you were cruel, but because you were consistent. And when that consistency ends, they no longer know how to feel important. They depended on your emotional labor. They depended on your validation. And when you detached, they lost their emotional compass. But that's not on you. That's a result of the illusion they were living in. An illusion that said your availability equaled obligation. That your presence was permanent. That no matter how little they gave, you'd always be there. Detachment breaks that illusion. It reveals the truth. And truth, for those who have benefited from your silence, is uncomfortable. That's why they accuse you of being cold. But coldness is not clarity. Clarity is not cruelty. Clarity is saying, I no longer participate in relationships that require me to abandon myself. That's not harsh. That's healing. And yes, it hurts. The transition hurts. Because you were trained to believe that love means being needed. That value is proven by effort. But real value doesn't scream. It doesn't chase. It doesn't beg. It stands. It breathes. It waits. And if it must, it walks. With grace. With dignity. Without noise. So here's the truth no one told you. Detachment is not the end of love. It's the beginning of self-respect. It's the sacred pause that lets you evaluate whether what you're holding onto is nourishing or depleting you. It's the stillness that reminds you, I'm not here to be consumed. I'm here to be respected. And if that respect isn't returned, then detachment is not revenge, it's alignment. So the next time someone tells you you've changed, that you're cold, that you're not the same, smile. Because they're right. You're not the same. You're not the person who sacrifices your sanity to be seen. You're not the person who fills the silence with explanations. You're not the person who trades your peace for proximity. You're the person who finally understood that you don't owe anyone access to your energy. Especially not those who only value it when they fear losing it. And that understanding? That's not cold. That's clarity. 4. Your silence becomes the loudest sound. Silence has a strange kind of gravity, doesn't it? It pulls things to the surface, things people thought they could hide, truths they tried to avoid, behaviors they never had to question when you were the one always speaking, explaining, fixing, reaching. But when the noise stops, when your voice goes quiet, when you no longer respond, not out of spite, but out of stillness, that's when everything changes. Your silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means everything is. Because silence isn't empty. It's full. Full of reflection. Full of realization. Full of the weight your words used to carry but were never truly heard. Now, with nothing left to say, they hear everything. And it echoes. It loops in their mind, not because you said something shocking, but because you finally stopped talking altogether. That absence? It speaks. It speaks in their scrolling through your old messages. It speaks when they check your profile and see no reaction. It speaks when they go to send a message and realize they're no longer sure if you'll respond. That's the power of silence. It becomes the mirror they've been avoiding. And for people who are used to manipulating others through emotional chaos, that mirror is unbearable. Because it reflects them, not the version you softened, not the image they curated, but their real behavior, raw and unfiltered. That's what haunts them. The silence becomes a consequence, not a punishment, but a reflection. And the louder it gets, the more they panic. They thought you'd always respond. They thought you'd always care, always be the first to mend the distance. They thought they knew how to trigger your reaction. But now you're still unreadable. And that unreadability shakes them. You're not cold. You're clear. You're not avoiding. You're evolving. And evolution doesn't broadcast itself. It unfolds quietly, patiently, like a seed turning into something unstoppable beneath the soil. Think about it. How many times did you respond just to keep the peace? How often did you break your own boundaries to avoid being misunderstood? How many moments did you fill with words that were never met with understanding, only resistance? And now that you've stopped? Now that you've gone still? They don't know what to do. Not because they've suddenly become self-aware, but because they've lost their favorite distraction, your reaction. Because in Stoic relationships, reaction is power. And when you stop reacting, you take that power back. You stop being predictable. You stop being accessible. And suddenly, they don't know how to feel superior. Your silence becomes a reminder that their control was never real. It was borrowed from your need to be heard, to be seen, to be understood. But now you understand yourself. You've stepped into that stillness not as a tactic, but as a truth. You no longer need to defend who you are. You no longer need their acknowledgement. That's what makes the silence so loud. It's not what you say, it's what you no longer need to. And here's the deeper truth. They had their chance to listen when you were still speaking. They had the opportunity to show up when your heart was wide open, when your energy was flowing freely. But they didn't. They chose comfort over effort. They chose games over growth. And now, they're left with the consequences. Not because you wish them harm, but because you chose healing. That's what Stoicism teaches us. We don't control others, only ourselves. And silence is the ultimate self-control. It's not passive. It's active peace. It's holding space for your own soul instead of trying to fix someone else's chaos. And as that silence stretches, it teaches them the lesson you could never explain with words. Your energy was a gift, and gifts can be withdrawn. Not because they were unworthy, but because you were overgiving. Not because you're heartless, but because you finally found your heart again. That's the shift. That's the storm hidden in the calm. And they feel it. Oh, they feel it. Not in a loud breakdown, but in quiet confusion. Not in angry texts, but in anxious refreshes. Not in dramatic closure, but in the dull ache of realizing they don't matter to you the way they used to. And that shift? That's everything. That's the moment they start spiraling. Not because you stopped caring overnight, but because they failed to notice how much you did while it still counted. You didn't change the rules, you just stopped playing the game. And in doing so, you changed the entire dynamic. You're not who you used to be. You don't need the final word. You don't need the last apology. You don't even need to be understood anymore. You're not chasing peace. You've become it. And now your silence? It's louder than your love ever was. So if this is resonating, if you've ever felt your own silence roaring louder than all your previous attempts to explain, then I want you to like this video and comment, number 1, below. Let's show the world how powerful quiet can be. And if you're serious about building Stoic relationships rooted in clarity, not chaos, then subscribe now. Because we're just getting started, and this journey isn't about going back, it's about rising in silence. 5. You become unreadable, and that haunts them. When you were consistent, they understood how to move. When you always responded, they knew which buttons to press. When you reacted, they calculated their steps with confidence because you were familiar, you were reliable, and you were readable. But then you stopped. You didn't scream. You didn't post cryptic messages or stage a dramatic exit. You simply removed your energy from the equation. And in that quiet withdrawal, something happened that they never saw coming. You became unreadable. No longer predictable. No longer emotionally accessible. No longer following the same patterns that made them feel safe in their control. And that, more than anything, is what haunts them. Because when someone is used to reading you like a script, your silence turns their world into static. They try the old tricks, texting late, posting something subtle, baiting you with nostalgia, and for the first time, you don't flinch. You don't react. You don't even acknowledge. That unreadability? It's not cruelty. It's clarity. It's the calm that comes when you no longer need to defend your worth. When you no longer need to show your heart to someone who only used it as a tool to feed their ego. That's when you cross the threshold. You are no longer a character in their story. You are the blank page they can't interpret. You become a mystery. And that mystery is unbearable to someone who once felt powerful simply because they could predict you. Now they're stuck in their own spiral, replaying your last words, rereading your last message, checking your activity like it's a puzzle they can't solve. But there's nothing to solve anymore. Because you've evolved beyond the version of you who needed to be understood. You're not pretending to be unreadable. You just no longer feel the need to be seen in places where your clarity was once ignored. And in Stoic relationships, that shift from transparency to mystery is a rite of passage. It's what happens when you graduate from over-explaining to simply observing. You let your absence say what your words no longer need to. And in doing so, you shake their reality. Because when someone can't read you, they lose the map. They lose the framework that made them feel in control. They try to guess, to decode, to provoke, but you remain still. You remain sovereign. And that stillness is more disturbing to them than any confrontation ever could be. Let's talk about the power of becoming unreadable. It's not about being sneaky or cold. It's about becoming centered. When you're unreadable, you're unshakable. Because you're no longer reacting to their behavior, you're responding to your own truth. You're not being pulled by their inconsistency. You're being anchored by your self-awareness. And the deeper you go into that inner stability, the more detached you become from the outcome. You no longer care whether they notice, whether they regret, whether they try again. That detachment makes you powerful. And that power is terrifying to someone who once relied on your emotional predictability. They missed the version of you who was always available. The version who replied quickly, who chased clarity, who couldn't sleep without closure. But that version of you doesn't live here anymore. And that absence? That unreadable presence? It haunts them. Because it's not just that they lost access to you. It's that they don't know how, when, or even if they'll ever understand what you're thinking now. That lack of insight drives them wild. Because people fear the unknown more than the truth. They were prepared for your tears. They had comebacks ready for your anger. They expected the arguments. But you didn't deliver that. You delivered silence. Stillness. Distance. A complete removal of the emotional fuel they once thrived on. And now they're lost. Not because you were dramatic, but because you became undefined. And that undefined presence is not an act. It's a stage of evolution. One that comes when you no longer allow people to access you through confusion, chaos, or guilt. You're not playing hard to get. You've just removed yourself from the game. And now that you're unreadable, they can't predict your next move. That's not a tactic. That's a boundary. You're no longer communicating to be understood, you're living to be aligned. You don't need them to get it. You don't need them to see you. Because Stoicism teaches that your peace doesn't require validation. Your growth doesn't need to be narrated. You are no longer a broadcast. You're a private signal. And the people who once relied on your openness now find themselves trying to tune into a frequency that no longer plays for them. So yes, becoming unreadable will make them uncomfortable. But that discomfort is not your responsibility to soothe. It's theirs to explore. Because in that discomfort, they are finally forced to reflect. To see what your silence says that your voice never could. And you don't owe them another performance. You don't owe them another drop of transparency. You've given enough. And now, it's your time to become what they never expected, untouchable, unreadable, and completely at peace in your own presence. 6. Healing isn't loud, it's indifference. There comes a moment, after all the noise and all the drama and all the chasing and proving and bending, when you finally sit still with yourself and something inside goes silent. Not the kind of silence that screams for attention, but the kind that settles deep into your bones and says, "I'm done." Not out of bitterness. Not out of defeat. But because you finally understand that healing isn't loud. It doesn't post updates. It doesn't beg to be seen. It doesn't need to announce its progress. Healing just is. It's the quiet decision to no longer engage. To no longer react. To no longer need someone to see your pain in order for it to be real. And that decision? It's what transforms you. Because indifference isn't apathy. It's mastery. It's when the storms outside no longer shake the calm inside. It's when their texts don't stir your anxiety. It's when their posts don't trigger your insecurities. It's when you see their name and feel nothing. Not anger. Not pain. Not even nostalgia. Just neutrality. The neutrality of someone who's risen above the need for closure, revenge, or validation. That's where true healing lies. In the sacred space where you no longer need to prove anything, not to them, not to yourself. And that's the part they never saw coming. They expected you to be angry. They expected another message. Another outburst. Another emotional plea. They were prepared for resistance. But what they got was stillness. Indifference. A silence so whole, so rooted, it unsettles them in ways your words never could. Because indifference, unlike silence, doesn't wait. It doesn't linger. It doesn't wonder. It moves forward without flinching. And in Stoic relationships, that's the apex of power. Not detachment for show. Not distance for control. But full disengagement because you've remembered your worth. You've come back home to yourself. And that home isn't built on their attention. It's built on your peace. Indifference is the moment you choose yourself so completely that their opinion loses all currency. That's what haunts them now, not that you're gone, but that you're free. That you're not performing strength, you're living it. You're not faking calm, you've become it. You're not holding on to be remembered, you've let go because forgetting them was part of remembering who you are. And yes, that terrifies them. Because now, they're not just dealing with your absence, they're dealing with your evolution. They're watching from afar, hoping for a crack in your silence. Hoping for a sign that you still care, that there's still a door open. But that door closed quietly, respectfully, without drama. Because you don't need to slam doors when you're not trying to be heard. You just walk through and lock it behind you. Not to trap them out, but to finally let yourself rest. Rest from the proving. Rest from the explaining. Rest from the exhausting cycle of overextending just to feel seen. And in that rest, in that indifference, you rise. You start building a version of you that doesn't chase, doesn't need, doesn't settle. A version of you who values peace more than being chosen. Who would rather be alone in wholeness than accompanied in confusion. That's not cold. That's wise. That's stoicism in motion. Because healing isn't about showing them what they lost. It's about remembering what you nearly gave away forever, yourself. And when you hold that realization close, when you stop engaging with the noise, when you stop reacting, you start to attract something different. Not chaos. Not games. But alignment. You start to draw people who don't need you to break to feel powerful. People who meet you in clarity, not confusion. Who don't confuse silence for punishment, but recognize it as peace. And you'll notice something beautiful, you'll stop looking back. Not because you're trying to be strong, but because you genuinely have no desire to return to a version of yourself that tolerated what you now see as unacceptable. That's growth. That's the quiet revolution. That's the part they'll never forget. Not because you were cruel, but because you were calm. Because you didn't beg. Because you didn't break. Because you just became untouchable. And in a world addicted to noise, your indifference is thunder. So if this is resonating with you right now, if you feel the shift, if you feel yourself detaching from what once had a grip on your soul, then hit that like button and comment, number 1, below. Let's show the power of peace. And if you want more content like this, content rooted in truth, clarity, and the quiet fire of Stoic relationships, then go ahead and subscribe now. Because this isn't the end. This is the rebirth. And what comes next? They won't be able to handle it. But you will. You've pulled back your energy. You've chosen stillness over case, silence over spectacle, detachment over desperation. And now here you are, on the other side of it all, still standing, still breathing, but something fundamental has shifted inside you. You're not the same. And you're not supposed to be. Because when you act like they don't matter, not out of bitterness but from the truth that you never truly did matter to them in the way you deserved, they lose something they never thought they could lose. Access to the version of you who made them feel powerful, needed, important. But what did you lose? Let's be honest, it felt like everything at first. You lost the comfort of a familiar pattern, even if it hurt. You lost the illusion of connection. You lost the hope that if you just loved harder, waited longer, tried again, it would change. That loss hit hard. It made you question yourself. Made you wonder if maybe you were the one who was too much, too sensitive, too emotional. But then the clarity arrived. Not all at once. Slowly. Quietly. Like the rising sun after a sleepless night. You started to see the relationship for what it was, not a partnership, but a performance. Not mutual love, but emotional dependency. Not stability, but manipulation dressed up as chemistry. And with that clarity came power. The power to no longer chase. The power to no longer respond. The power to no longer explain your worth to someone who only valued your attention. That power? It didn't roar. It whispered. It didn't seek revenge. It reclaimed peace. And that's what they never expected. They expected drama. They expected one last explosion of emotion. But instead, they got indifference. They got distance. They got you choosing yourself without needing to make it obvious. That quiet exit? It spoke louder than 1,000 goodbye texts. Because it said, I no longer need this to define me. And that's what broke their sense of control. You see, people don't panic when you get angry. They panic when you stop reacting. They panic when you no longer need to be seen. Because so many relationships aren't built on love, they're built on attention. And the moment you stop feeding someone's ego, they spiral. Not because they love you, but because they loved how they felt when you loved them. But now, they don't have that mirror. They don't have your validation to make them feel whole. And they're left with their own reflection, unfiltered, raw, and uncomfortable. That's not cruelty. That's justice. Because for too long, you gave more than you received. You showed up while they played games. You forgave while they repeated patterns. You opened your heart while they protected their ego. And now you've stopped auditioning. You've stopped being the one who holds it all together. You've stopped being the emotional generator for someone who only showed up when it was easy. That's what Stoicism reminds us. True strength isn't loud. It isn't reactive. It doesn't perform. It simply endures. It simply remains. It simply walks away when the situation no longer serves growth. And in doing so, it reclaims the most precious thing you have, your energy. Because your energy is sacred. And for too long, you handed it over to people who didn't know how to honor it. But now you're different. You've pulled it back, not to punish them, but to preserve yourself. To rebuild. To rise. Because healing isn't a spectacle. It's not a highlight reel. It's the quiet commitment to choose peace even when chaos invites you to dance. It's the soft but firm decision to say, this no longer has access to me. And when you make that decision, something powerful happens. You begin to attract a different reality. A reality where you are centered, whole, and untouchable. Where your peace is no longer up for negotiation. Where your worth is not determined by someone else's ability to recognize it. Where your silence is not emptiness, but a sanctuary. A place where your soul can rest. Because you've been tired, haven't you? Tired of giving without receiving. Tired of hoping they'll change. Tired of explaining yourself to someone who never really listened. But now you're not tired. You're done. There's a difference. Done is final. Done is clean. Done is free. And in that freedom, there is rebirth. Rebirth of your standards. Rebirth of your boundaries. Rebirth of your identity, no longer tethered to someone else's approval. This journey, this choice to act like they don't matter, was never about becoming bitter. It was about becoming wise. It was about learning that not all who smile love you, not all who stay deserve you, and not all who notice you value you. That wisdom? It cost you. It cost you nights of confusion, of grief, of longing. But it also gave you something far more valuable, clarity. Clarity that allows you to sit in your silence and not feel empty. Clarity that allows you to stop chasing closure and instead close the door yourself. Clarity that allows you to walk into rooms knowing your energy is a gift, not a currency to be spent on the ungrateful. And here's the truth: they might come back. They might reach out. They might send that "just checking in" text. Not because they've changed, but because they've felt the shift. Because the version of you who once gave everything without question no longer exists. Because they don't know how to access the person you've become. And you won't need to block them. You won't need to argue. You won't need to explain why you're gone. You'll just be gone. Spiritually, emotionally, energetically. Not lost, but found. Found in your own peace. Found in your own strength. Found in the understanding that the most powerful thing you can do is walk away quietly, without fanfare, without warning, and never look back. That is the mark of emotional maturity. That is the result of stoicism. Not the absence of love, but the presence of wisdom. So as you sit in this new space, this new energy, let it fill you. Let it restore you. Let it guide you into becoming the version of yourself who never needs to prove their worth again. Who never overextends just to be noticed. Who never shrinks just to be accepted. That version of you? They are rising. Not to be seen, but to be sovereign. To live in truth, in dignity, and in calm. And from this day forward, let your actions speak what your words no longer need to. Let your absence teach what your presence used to compensate for. Let your energy be spent only where it's matched, honored, and respected. Because now you know the truth. When you act like they don't matter, not with bitterness, but with clarity, they lose the one thing they never thought they'd lose: your power. And you gain everything they could never give you: yourself.